This is Taylor Gray, voice of Ezra Bridger on Star Wars Rebels, and you are listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Z. This is the podcast you're looking for.
Controls are useless, they're melted.
Well, it's probably not rated for lava.
Imperial trash.
All right, I'm headed back. Hit me up on the comm, we can set up a rendezvous time.
You park your gills right there until I say otherwise.
I am here to bring you to justice.
Justice is merely the construct of the current power base. A base which, according to my calculations, is about to change.
Order! We shall have order!
It is with great reluctance that I have agreed to this calling. I love democracy. I love the Republic. The power you give me, I will lay down when this crisis has abated.
Who was that?
That was Venger, the force of evil. I am Dungeon Master, your guide in the realm of Dungeons and Dragons.
This is James Arnold Taylor, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi. I have a good feeling about this.
We've got a great show for you here on Coffee with Kenobi. We have two returning guests and one brand new guest. These are three of the four authors of Lore and Legends, a visual celebration of the 5th edition of the world's greatest role-playing game. Of course, we're talking about Dungeons and Dragons. So we have with us on the show Michael Witwer, Jon Peterson, and Kyle Newman. Gentlemen, welcome to Coffee with Kenobi, or welcome back to the show.
Thanks so much, Dan. Thrilled to be here. Great to see you again.
You too.
Thank you, Dan. This is Kyle, so you can acknowledge my voice. You'll know it's me.
And then we've got Jon Peterson. Jon is brand new to the show, but certainly no stranger to all the incredible things going on in the world of Dungeons and Dragons, authorial ships, and Star Wars. Jon, it's great to have you.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to be here. I am the newbie on the show tonight, but I am delighted to meet you. Delighted to be here.
Wonderful, wonderful. Let's just kick it off. I mean, so this book, of course, is very exciting. And I want to talk about, before we get into the book itself, what to you is different about Dungeons and Dragons this time around that is it's cemented much more firmly in the zeitgeist as opposed to previous iterations of the game itself?
Well, that is one of the things that we explore in our book, Lore and Legends. It is, what is this phenomenon? Like, what is it? How is it happening? Why is it happening? And it's this confluence of things, and it's not just an incredible game set, because we're the era we're in. They've made they've reduced D&D. I hate using that word, but by taking all the good ingredients from the past and figuring out what are the flavors that make it exciting, what are the flavors that activate the D&D of it all. Like, even if it's weird, even if it doesn't work, if it's kooky. Sometimes those are specifically D&D. Those things have now been distilled down. We know what that is, and they put that forward. That, in conjunction with actual play, Acquisitions Inc., Critical Role, and this explosion of other people on Twitch, and billions of hours of people watching people game. Then you've got D&D in the media, everything from, Rick and Morty, Stranger Things, Big Bang Theory. It's just the smorgasbord of appearances. You've got D&D being talked about on talk shows. It's in the news. Like, the taboos have been stripped away. It's readily available. And then on top of that, there are people, everyone out there is a fantasy fan. They've grown up now with Harry Potter, Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings, and not just grown up with it. Those are things that are prestige. They've won all the awards. Those are the preeminent IPs. So you have all these things happening. That's what makes D&D makes it stick right now, is that the stigmas are gone. The game is easier to play. The game is in your face. You have digital apps that allow you to play, and it still maintains the core of the game, which is people coming together at a tabletop face-to-face. It's an analog game. You're still going to use technology, but you are coming together like a little group of friends, a family, every week. And beyond that, they've transitioned the game into a lifestyle brand. So you're seeing the game being licensed in an unprecedented way, products across the board. And that's happening to all IPs, but D&D became part of that. So and you see a big Hollywood movie. You're seeing, celebrities like Jack Black and David Harbour and all these people coming to play D&D on the official stream. So it's hard to say one thing. It's hard to say that the corporation made a choice and did this and now it's successful, or one person was in charge. It's all of these things. So like I said, we do try to get into that in our Lore and Legends book, but that's the landscape right now. Is D&D is in this vaulted position with tens of millions of players, and it never had that before. So I don't know if it's the exact answer to your question, but that's like a lot of things that we've been talking about and thinking about and trying to figure out why we're here and what's made this game so special this time around. I think that's why it's sticking, is because it's okay to love D&D.
The confluence is a really excellent part of that, because there was all these wonderful things working together. Because, and John, I'll throw this one your way. There was, of course, a time where Dungeons and Dragons had this really a negative statement where parents would say to kids, "Oh, you can't play that game because it's got some dangerous influences and things of that nature." And then, as we hope sort of mature as a society, I guess that's sort of a circumspect term, but it kind of falls apart. And I think we're better for it because, as Kyle said, this really does, like food, like your other book, it brings people together.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so glad you mentioned food, because we do have this other book as well. It's called Heroes Feast, Flavors of the Multiverse, I believe, that you could also get today if you like D&D books and you like the D&D lifestyle that Kyle was speaking to a moment ago. But certainly, you're quite correct. There was a time, and I mean, it was even kind of ridiculous at the time, right? Like, I mean, I don't know how many people, apart from very backwards religious fundamentalists, actually kind of bought into this narrative for reals. But there was a time when people thought, well, there's a red demonic figure on the cover of this book with horns, and it looks like it must be the devil. And so if kids are playing this, they're talking about casting spells, and there's all this, references to things that definitely are not Bible Belt Christianity in this book, or if they are, they're being used the wrong way. And so, yeah, I mean, that had a shelf life, I'd say, right? Like, I mean, I think it was actually quite essential to the promotion of D&D, initially, but, insofar as it did like material damage to the brand, let's face it, like by the time you get into the 90s, this conversation had moved on. You had bands that were much scarier than D&D, or, take your pick of today, we have TikTok, or whatever, right? That is much scarier than D&D.
Agreed.
And, that too, I think goes back to some of what Kyle was speaking to a moment ago, that, the longevity, I think, of the brand and its applicability to our lives today, a lot of that has to come down to what a kind of personal and artisanal experience it is to just be able to like get together with your friends and play this game, be it around a physical tabletop or a virtual tabletop, and just kind of have the experience that you want to have doing it. And there is something about that in this era of creators, I guess, and we are, in an era now where I think, people are energized about being creators by the promise of the internet, among other things out there in our culture. Like, D&D is kind of the perfect tool for that, right? Like, because it really does let you sit down and tell the kind of story that you and your friends want to tell. And there's something very different about, say, even a AAA computer game, brilliant one, a Witcher, a Last of Us. There's something that is a bit more limited about the way that you can interact with that story. You're there to experience a story that somebody else is curating. D&D isn't that. D&D has always been about kind of finding your own bliss in it. And I think that's a message that just really resonates today with people.
I love that. That's outstanding. Michael is shaking his head all the way on that. Well, I mean, it's a story, right? But what's great, Michael, is that you've got a brand new book. It's a story about the story of the 5th edition. It's a gorgeous book, as what you would expect. But while this book is about the 5th edition of D&D, what else makes this book unique compared to previous Dungeons and Dragons art and arcana?
Yeah, great question, Dan. So yeah, it's funny. What I might suggest is, what John was just talking about with the 80s, what on a colloquial level, they often call the satanic panic around the game, which of course wasn't just D&D. It was rock music. It was censorship. There's a lot of things. But I might argue that an equally unlikely series of events happened between, in that case, 1979 and say 82 or 83, where the game hit its first zenith. That has happened, say, in the last 10 years of the game. That is to say, a number of, as Kyle said earlier, a confluence of really remarkable factors occurred. Some of them happened within the walls of Wizards of the Coast. That is to say, they made them happen. They made good choices. But a number of things happened outside the walls that no one could have planned for. And I'll talk about that in a second. But to answer your original question, how it relates to Art and Arcana, because that's a really great one. And I'm really glad. I'm reminded you know that book well. So we were here a couple of years ago talking about it. So, right, Art and Arcana, that book came out in 2018, but it effectively kind of peters out on the timeline in about 2016, give or take. And the scope of that book was to be a visual history of the brand. So to be exact, some people call it an art book, but to be exact, it's really a visual history in the respect that it's trying to tell the story of D&D proper, the story of the brand from 1974 all the way to as contemporarily as we could, through images. And those images sometimes were art, yes, but sometimes they were ephemera. Sometimes they were advertising. We used visuals to try to tell that story. That's why it's a visual history. And it was just a amazingly wonderful project to do with this group of co-authors, and we learned so much. But again, that book peters out around 2016. And so it occurred to us as the years went by, and as that book did really well, and we all of a sudden started writing cookbooks about D&D, getting brought into all this other thing. The D&D, we had not reached the peak of D&D mania, at least contemporarily. And so around 2020, as we were wrapping up the cookbook, we came to a realization, a couple of things. First of all, that D&D is absolutely, by any measure you want to use, adjusted for time or not, bigger than it's ever been. In pop culture and in many, many different ways, measuring by playership, whatever metric you want to use. So around 2020, we're like, wow, there's an amazing story here. But I think the real core of it was simply this. The question we wanted to answer with this book, unlike Art and Arcana, which was, again, trying to tell us, say, a 45-year visual history of the brand, told through visuals. This book has a little bit more of it's a proper sequel. It's telling the last 10 years. It's about the same scope. It's the same form factor. But the question we wanted to answer, which I think was a really intriguing one, was how in the world did a 40-year-old brand, which was on life support by many measures by 2012, how did a 40-year-old brand that is fundamentally an analog, tabletop, dusty game become a superstar in a digital age? How did that happen? It is the most unlikely story, or every bit as unlikely, you might say, as the satanic panic vaulting the game to the public eye. And as Kyle said, I won't beat that dead horse, but ultimately what we came to find out is there's this incredible, interesting story that is way less expected than you think. And it has a little bit to do with, yes, a beautifully well-tested rule set that was rolled out kind of at the right time by the right people. Yes, great continuity of art design. Yes, wonderful new story and leveraging old IP that was much beloved of the fan base that went back 30 years. But there was other things that happened, like who would have ever expected that, for example, that same year in 2014 when the 5th edition rolled out, that this podcast, Adventure Zone, would become this big sensation, to say nothing of what happens a few months later in 2015. A group of voice actors decides to adopt 5th edition as their actual play game, and that, of course, becomes Critical Role. You can't plan for something like that. And to see how that took the brand kind of to the next step. And then for example, 1 year later, for Stranger Things to make D&D the focal point of kind of a thematic focal point of that show. So to see how these things kind of worked, it's a really series of unlikely events that created something kind of bigger than the sum of its parts. So that is the story we really wanted to tell using a very similar methodology that we use for Art and Arcana.
There's really nothing better than having 3 authors on that love what they're talking about. It's just, I can just sit back and imagine I'm listening to the show instead of go ahead, Kyle.
I was going to say one more thing too is the success of 5e they didn't come and say, you know what, we're going to wipe the board with everything and we're going to come all new characters, all new settings. They, in a very smart way, after a robust playtest, came to this conclusion that we're going to start in Forgotten Realms and we're going to build it out from there. But what they did was they went back into the past. They went and they brought forward familiar characters. They didn't alienate the past. They actually paid homage to the past, and there was a reverence towards it. And they did it in their own new way. But the cover stars of all of these 5th edition books, Sararak, and you've got Xanathar, and you've got Tasha, and you've got Van Richten, and all these people that have made these huge guest star appearances are all from the past. These aren't all new characters. So part of what we do in Lore and Legends is look to the past and to if you're new to D&D and 5e, you might not know that. But we do try to give some context to it to say, okay, this person came from these books, these Volos guides. Look at these Volos guides that came before. He did Volos guide to these different locales, and he was a character, and you understand, there's some more to it. So if you're experiencing it 5e new and you pick up Volos guide in 2016, you're like, cool, I love it, Volos guide to monsters. But if you've been around for a long time, it's in a tradition. It's also speaking to you. So I think that was very clever on their part on a business sense. And we try to also look at that and give some history to these iconic, monsters and villains and characters.
Love that. Well, so this is great to ask you this, Kyle, because as a director, you are a filmmaker, you are a storyteller. And then I would imagine, I've never had the good fortune to play with any of you, but I imagine you run a heck of a good D&D game as a dungeon master. How much as a director carries over into being a DM?
So much of storytelling, but it's a different type of storytelling. There's a certain control when you're a director or a screenwriter. Like you're running a ship. You've got 100, 200 people. You have to bring out the best in them. So a lot of that's similar but different. So you're telling a story. You got to be organized. You got to have your stuff together. You have to come prepared for any which way it could go, especially on a set. You don't know what weather's going to happen. You can't change the location day of. You just deal with it. Or, something's not working in the story. You got to figure it out. That happens in a D&D game. You're the dungeon master, and your players don't want to go exactly where you thought they were going to go, or they're far more accelerated than you were planned for. So it's adaptability, it's organization, but key to it all is collaboration. And it's actually listening to the people, because you're the dungeon master, but it doesn't mean you're totally God. You are participating on a level with them too. You have to meet them on the level that they are in the game. You're meeting them continually on character and environmental levels. It's not just like you're just overseer and puppet master. I know people approach it that way. I tend to approach it as I'm at your level, I'm with you, and I have to be there with you. I have to be able to interact with you at that level. Forget all that macro stuff. So you have to have a certain amount of empathy, compassion to talk to people in the moment, in their character. And that's where the story's made. It's in those character choices. And how you engage, how you activate that for them. Because that's literally where the magic of the story, the collaborative storytelling comes forward. And this is an art form not like anything else. It's not like film where it's scripted and it's controlled and you have a plan and then you goes to an editor and then you go refine it and there's a propaganda to it. You know what I mean? You can go shape the way people feel about something. In D&D, it's about the moment and how you experience it together as opposed to how it's post-produced. So they are different art forms. And I do look at like D&D and role-playing. It is a new type of art form, a new type of game. So I just tend to try to be as fun and as present as possible and let go of the things I as the dungeon master had planned or hoped, because I always find it's the left of center stuff, the stuff that you can never plan. That's the stuff that people repeat or talk about a year later. The in-jokes aren't what you scribble down before the game. They're literally the stuff that happens as a unexpected byproduct. That's the magic.
Yeah, and so you have to be, insert sports metaphor here. You got to be Tom Brady. You got to be able to improvise at that line of scrimmage, because it really is about the players. You can't be a narcissistic DM and have anybody want to play with you, because you want to be able to collaborate and tell the story together. But have you ever been in a situation, the three of you, where you're with a dungeon master that refuses to let the players have any outcome on the game before? And how do you handle that? This is like become a therapy session, I guess.
I mean, look, a lot comes down to force of personality. There are some people who do theory of RPGs who compare the process of playing to a Ouija board that we all kind of put our fingers on around the table and we push it to what the next letter is going to be. And, I think if you're determined to see something done, you are the worst enemy of DM who wants to railroad you, right? So, I have a hard time thinking of any. I've certainly played in situations that were hopeless, and where the only outcome was we're all going to die, and but even that can be fun. I don't know. You can die in some colorful manner, right?
Absolutely.
So you just make it your own. It's hard to have a bad time playing D&D in my experience.
Agreed.
I would say ego is the great destroyer, in filmmaking especially, because what it does is it kills the good idea. It scares away opportunity. That happens in D&D too. I think if people feel if they're scared of their dungeon master or they feel like they can't be free, it is a game killer. And we're talking about creative mediums. You have to be able to just try, experiment, and have fun. And film, people use ego as armor to protect themselves. That's their armor class. It's like how big of an ass you can be. They think it gives them more protection. And but it's cumbersome. It's really damaging to the creative process. And I find it absolutely destructive if a DM is that controlling. There was a game recently where somebody was like, people were presenting backstories and they were just like shooting down backstories of everybody. And then sitting down and like trying to rewrite their backstory and then trying to mansplain like the notion of backstory to people. And I was like, oh my God, this game is like off the, and then I couldn't play in it. It was like a session 0. I was like, I'm out. It was just like, that's where very rarely does that happen, but you're like, you can't manhandle the creative process for people. If someone's got excited to do that, then as a DM, you just go, okay, let me find a way to wrap what I'm doing around that. That's how you meet. That's how you collaborate. And the key to this medium is collaboration.
Michael, anything to add to that?
No, I think that was all very well said. I've been pretty fortunate to have not played with a lot of bad DMs. In fact, I've spent most of my gaming time and gaming life with my brother, Sam, who is a genius DM in my view. I have to say that, by the way. I'm paid to say that.
Yes.
But no,
and a genius co-author.
And a genius co-author. He was on. He was the one that ran my first D&D game, brought me into it. All the way through all of our Star Wars. Dan, as you may know, it was the West End game that got us really fueled on Star Wars. That's why we knew everything there was to know about what they used to call the expanded universe or whatever they call it today. But it's because we knew every book that West End was putting out. But so I think I've been really fortunate, but I can think of a lot of the positives that someone like Sam brings to the game. Take someone who happens to be a really excellent actor, and that's not required, by the way. I almost reluctant to mention that because that speaks to what some people call the Matt Mercer effect. This notion that you have to be this incredible theatrical talent to be able to be a great DM. And it's not so, right? It's not so. I think it has a lot to do with reading the room, meeting the players where they are, and being excited to hear. Being as excited as a spectator as you are as a DM. And I think that's where Sam shines, actually. So yes, he can do the voices. He can give you, he's one of the most creative storytellers I've ever known. But at the end of the day, what I get excited about is that you sense that he wants to play almost more than everybody else because he wants to hear what happens next. And that is a sign of a good DM, is because he doesn't know. He wants to see what we're up to. It's a pretty rewarding experience to play with him. So I'll just give an endorsement to my brother on this one.
I love it. And he has your Venmo, right? Yeah.
yeah. It's actually processing as we speak. I've got my phone in front of me here. So I'm
very glad. No, that's great because I never thought of it this way, Michael, but it's like you're a teacher when you're a dungeon master. And I have, when we were in one of my British literature classes, when we were reading Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula, and we did a campaign where the only students who actually did well and survived the campaigns were the ones who read the book, because I put a lot of stuff in there to not only check their reading, but to make sure that they were able to fully engage with the process. And what a process it must have been. We've got this wealth of gorgeous art for Lore and Legends. For 5e, of course, there's just so much to enjoy. But what was the process like to decide what pieces would be used in the book itself?
I can start with that one, and we can go back around the other way. Well, firstly, Dan, I happen to know you know something about collaborating on a kind of visual-oriented type book. You having done a really excellent one yourself. I'll give you a plug on the Star Wars book. You did that with Cole and Pablo. I
did.
Think,
yes,
if memory
yes.
serves.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you did another one, which I'm really looking forward to checking out. I Am Your Father, I think you call it. So you know something about co-authoring, which I think conceptually doesn't always make sense to people. How do you take what is otherwise a singular idea and create something that is a singular storyline between many, many different people? Do you divide and conquer? What do you do? It's probably more like a game of D&D than we think sometimes, right? It's this notion of shared and group storytelling. In our case, for the record, we because this was an honest sequel to Art and Arcana, we used the exact same methodology as Art and Arcana. And so we decided early on, and we decided this in 2016 when we first started working on that project, or maybe it was early 2017, this notion that if it was an art book, it was actually almost fundamentally problematic. Not that there's anything wrong with an art book, but choosing arbitrary art because it looks cool doesn't create a cohesive experience. In other words, we may have struck gold with a lot of those pieces, but it's otherwise just a disparate set of artworks all kind of plopped in a big, fancy-looking book, and that's that. I think what made Art and Arcana shine, and what I think brought it to the next level for at least a lot of fans of the game, was that we were trying to tell a cohesive story with visuals, as I said earlier, right? And so how did we do that? Well, fundamentally, it was kind of this approach, again, brought not only through that, but brought through lore and legends, trying to answer that question I mentioned earlier. That is to say, if the brand is a character, let's say Dungeons and Dragons is a person, what is the story of that person or that brand? What is going on with that brand? What is it thinking about? That's why things like advertising actually really help tell the story. One of my favorite pieces, not to get too much into history, but one of my favorite parts of Art and Arcana, you might remember this spread, Dan. There's a spread where it's right in the thick of the Satanic Panic we mentioned earlier. And on one page, we show what the D&D catalog looked like in 1980 when this all started first bubbling up. And then in the opposite page, we show what the catalog looks like in 1981. In 1980, there's a big picture of a dangerous demon that's guarding a gate. And it's just a really ominous, very almost occult-looking image. On the opposite page, it's a cartoon of Morley the Friendly Wizard. And it is such a stark, it tells you everything you need to know about what TSR and what Dungeons and Dragons as a brand is thinking about at that very moment in time. So again, it's things like that where we try to adopt that methodology and say, what's happening with the brand? And by the way, as I said earlier, that might be happening within the walls of Wizards. That might be choices they're making on the design side, but it's also just as likely something that might be happening within the walls of Critical Role or over at Netflix with Stranger Things or any number of different things that are happening with the lifestyle elements going around in this game. So we follow the brand wherever it goes most strongly. And then once we've figured out what that narrative is, you might call it a timeline, then we can start grafting on images. And now we know what images we need to curate because we're trying to tell that story with the images available associated with that thing. That could be an image of Critical Role having a great time on screen. That could be an image of Jeremy Crawford and Chris Perkins making rules with Mike Merles. It could be any number of things, but it's become easy and frankly possible for us to curate what's an otherwise impossible collection of 80,000 contemporary images that we had full access to. How do you narrow that down? You have to know your story first. And that's how we went about it.
And you can look at it like, when we're looking for an organizing principle for the book, we experimented with a bunch of things of kind of how to split it up into chapters and kind of make it coherent, like across the brand's trajectory at the time. But it really, we came back to the stories, to the kind of marquee campaigns that were released across the various years. And we actually favored that organizationally even more than like the rule books, just because, they had this like great cadence to them. And there was always, a story that was, had some synergy, it seemed, with the situation of the brand at the time. Right. And, like when we look to the beginning of COVID, which of course we have to talk about COVID in a book covering this period, it coincides with Rime of the Frost Maiden, right? With this very John Carpenter, The Thing inspired, everyone's, in this cold and desolate environment. And, we called that chapter a warm hearth in winter, as a way of kind of showing again the relationship between the stories D&D was telling and like what was just going on with the people who interacted with it. And so, finding things like that too is part of the job. Like, when we did Art and Arcana, we had our own very different organizing principle, which was we just went every time there was new copies of the Player's Handbook and Monster Manual and Dungeon Master's Guide. That's a new chapter, right? And so those got new covers as a new chapter. For this, we got to do something I think that, maybe speaks even better to how the brand really just interacts with its fans.
I think like Michael said, the curation. I think that was really it. We spent a lot of our time in that mode of like, we're curating a gallery, and within each thing we're trying to showcase, say it's Strixhaven, it's the idea of going to learn magic, and what is it adapted from, and the influences of the author of it, the game designer. And she was talking about, the certain movies that she was trying to reference versus the type of movies that, say, Icewind Dale was talking about The Thing and films like that. Isolation, horror, environmental. Then you have Van Richten's, and it's different types of horror, supernatural, and then you like Avernus is a whole different flavor. And so you have a certain amount of real estate for each book to bring it to life in that chronology. And so you want to really choose the imagery that's going to activate that experience for the reader visually. Go, oh, I get it. This is about making a deal with the devil. It's hell type images. There's Hieronymus Bosch type maps. There's, it's like, what are those key things you can put into 4 or 6 pages? And how is that going to sit next to what comes after it, which might be a total zany breath of fresh air or Spelljammer, and suddenly you're into like, starscapes and celestial images and more exotic creatures, or if it's Eberron and you're getting into a different type of technology. So it's like, what are those visual things that they're doing, and how can then what are the 180 images per book or whatever you have access to, like what are the ones that intrinsically speak to the DNA of that setting or that story, the way they're telling that setting. And then it's like sitting them all next to each other and really balancing it beyond that. It was like, oh, we have too many of this type of thing, and why are there so many of that, and how do you counteract that? So there's a lot. It's just not random. There is so much planning and reorganization. So like you adorn the Christmas tree with these ornaments, and then you're like, oh, this doesn't look good. So you have to go move it around, and how does that affect the story? And then you learn stuff about the story, and then you go, well, we have to go now bring that to life more than just in words. We're seeing something happening here. So how can we then elevate that thought? So you use images to, like Michael was explaining before with like Art and Arcana, those juxtapositions. And when you find those juxtapositions that can be powerful, then you hold on to them, because that's what you want in like a coffee table book experience. It's like those things, you open a spread and you get it. Like Jon famously said, it's making it work with the sound off. And we always keep that in the back of our head, and it's a guiding light, that type of thought, because you do want to be able to read the book. You want to be able to have the same exact experience and have us illuminate the 5e and its trajectory just with visuals. If that's how you can interact with the book, all you can bring to it is a quick sit through and flip through and go, oh my God. And we also wanted this to be a new experience. There's people that have played 5e. There's people that think they know 5e. There's people that think they DM'd 5e. There is more than you can imagine, and you're seeing images in their native context. Like just the cover of Lore and Legends is an image, and most people don't really understand the importance of it. And there's symmetry between that and Art and Arcana. They're the similar POV, similar type of way in. You're over the shoulder of the hero looking in and up at a dragon, and we love those parallels. But that is the first piece of 5e art, really, like first official product out there that wasn't like, being tested. And that's the starter set. But it was so zoomed in that you just saw a part of the warrior's helm and you saw this green dragon. But by pulling out a little bit, it gives you a whole new way of looking at it, a different type of appreciation. And so we wanted to also find those vantage points. And for me, like I played a lot of 5e, but as a player, you only get a sliver of what's on offer. And as a DM, you only get a sliver, and then you haven't been able to play or DM everything. And then to see it in its native context, it was like, let's find those opportunities to go bigger, to show it zoomed out, to show it uncropped to show it without trade dress. Let's show products. Let's show three-dimensional things, not just flat art. Let's show what their licensees are doing. How are they bringing this theme or product to life in other mediums? Stuffed animals, or Beetle and Grimm's did this great with Witchlight. The unicorn horn came packed in with their box set, and these cool props and items, and that was new to this edition too. I think having more physical things to play with, the return of things like cosplay and stuff, showcasing the community, the events that D&D was doing and the events that they weren't doing. Like, what are these? How are fans interacting with what they're putting out? And that gave us, beyond the library of the IP imagery at our disposal, we wanted to invigorate it with imagery beyond the tried and true corporate story, and find those places where it intersected with mass media and other things we love. The way other things love D&D says a lot about how D&D has ascended in this past 10 or 12 years.
Well, I feel like, both books, they really are a perfect sort of complement to one another. It in many ways, hearing you all talk about it so beautifully, it's almost like the original vision for Epcot Center in Orlando, Florida, right? And everything was interactive and educational and beautiful, and there was a lot of art, and it was very community-based, the concept of it, learning about different parts of it. And this book kind of does that and brings it to life. And when you're talking about the art, of course, Dungeons and Dragons is just replete with it. But 5e, I think, and maybe just because it's more recently in our collective consciousness, because it's everywhere. Every time you open up social media, there's a new announcement of a new book coming out or things like that, but which means there's more art that comes to it. And what I like about Lore and Legends, well, there's many things, but I like, and Kyle, you mentioned this, there's variety here. It's not like every page is about Tiamat, although I love Tiamat. That would be pretty cool. But it brings together so many aspects. Not only talking about magic or just, the classic fighter, but, the different classes themselves or the different creatures, how it intersected with, there's a spread with SpongeBob, for example. There's so much great variety here. There's like a lot that you can kind of nibble on and enjoy. And then, of course, all of your prose really kind of bolsters everything. Jon, is there a certain element of the variety that really kind of you will find yourself particularly excited about writing about?
I guess cut my teeth as a researcher. I like going and finding source documents and showing connections and system evolution. I guess I study more than anything else how game systems evolve. And so for me, the most exciting part to write about was, I guess, the earliest bits of this, in the sense of when everything was up for grabs still. Okay, here you are, you're wizards. It's 2010. You released your first bite of this apple 10 years ago in 2000 with 3rd edition D&D, right after the acquisition of TSR. And 3rd edition did okay, and we did a 4th edition that we'll say that was fine too. But here we are, and there's demand for something to change. What do we do? And going through that process that they went through to try to figure out how to make a new edition of D&D that was going to be an edition for all editions. That was a tagline they used at the time, which required them to do things Kyle was talking about earlier, where they had to kind of go back and resuscitate a lot of classic figures that they could bring in settings to integrate into the game as they were putting it together. And obviously they initially focused on the Forgotten Realms, very, very popular setting both in analog and digital games and in prior years. But, the way that they then recruited this army of playtesters, 175,000 strong, culled feedback from them, produced endless variations on the system to test them out, and then get to a point where they had something stable enough they could call it a starter set, right? That they could get out as a product in front of people. That was the part I guess I was most energized about. I also like the little deep dives we do, the Who Is series, again, for the benefit largely of 5e readers who did not experience the last going on 50 years of D&D, who might not, be that familiar with who Volo is, or something like that, that there had been this huge number of books that had been published as Volo's guides to this or that in decades past. Like, just kind of giving that background information was also a lot of fun.
Yeah, and if I can piggyback that, right, absolutely right, that when you think about this particular collection of authors for this book, I thought we had a duty to do things just like that. There's a lot of people that, would have probably done the topic differently. People that, that, for example, if you were a big person in the actual play space, you may have focused on something very different. From our perspective, we came at it that it was a continuation of a book we'd already written we had looked at the first 45 years. So, the least we could do is provide the context, for example, of who is someone like Van Richten and who is Volo and who is Tasha. Let's figure out what the golden rules of 5th edition design were, and really spend some time with, because again, I guess what I'm getting at, Dan, is simply this. We had a very different challenge with this book based on the contemporary aspect of it. The notion that this was closer to contemporary journalism than it was a history book did flip some things for us in a very meaningful way. And I'll give you one notable example. So not only are you talking to people that are currently sitting in the chair, that has its own challenges, but when it comes to art and visuals in particular, nothing's rare on some level. Think of it this way. You buy a 5th edition book and you look at a piece of art, and then we put the same piece of art in said book, and it's like, oh, I have this. Well, you're feeding me back something I have. So then the question is, well, then how do we curate, and what do we give them that is actually something new that they haven't seen? And that's where it speaks to a little bit of what Kyle was getting at with this notion of, oh my gosh, we now Wizards of the Coast has given us access to this archive with 80,000 images of it. Has anyone ever seen this image? No, we haven't. This was a background on page 24 of the player's handbook, and you saw literally a corner of it. But it was this masterpiece by so-and-so. Putting that in its full form, that has value to the market, right? Or even better, showing a conceptual design of something that was never released. Even better. We were lucky enough to get our hands on some pretty disruptive stuff that was really great stuff that just wasn't right for 5th edition, and be able to put it in the book and contextualize it. So again, I would like to think that we stayed in our lane when it came to being researchers that were here to A, give context of how this fit into the bigger picture of the 50-year game, and B, try to be really mindful and intentional about what we were putting in front of people, knowing that repackaging art that they already had was not going to make it. It wasn't going to cut it. We needed to give you something new. And sometimes it was about finding some obscure, I'll give you an example. In one of the archives, we found there was a sketch of a were shark that never made the monster manual. Poor were shark. He'd never made it. And it kind of doesn't make any sense to think about, like, do you change and then like die because you can't breathe? How does it, anyway, it's a were shark, but stuff like that was really fun to just kind of trip on. Now that's just a little kind of, tangent, but that stuff has value, to people that know and love the game, whether they joined it within the last 10 years or whether they've been around for 50. And really shining a light on some of these things that they may have missed as they've played it. As Kyle said, nobody has DM'd every 5th edition adventure, unless you're maybe work for Wizards. Nobody has seen every secret, every trap. And so be able to kind of televise those things and put the story together from behind the scenes, I think was a pretty meaningful, and hopefully successful task on our part.
It's also, you have a whole train. Like, if this was just a game that came out 5 years ago, it wouldn't be interesting for us to talk about this game. But because we have, if you look at like a train, you've got the engine, which was the original thing, and it's still running, and you've got all these train cars, and right now it's the caboose, and we're looking at that. But you can't talk about that unless you understand the way trains work, the track that it's on, where it's coming from, where it's heading to. So that's where we were able to shift it from just contemporary journalism. And also, it's hard. People when they're on the payroll tell different stories than when they're 40 years removed. So you get different ways of looking at it. But by anchoring it in history and building off of the amazing stuff that, the research that Jon and Michael, bring to the table, it makes it have so much more nuance and dimension than just like a straightforward story. And then it felt like we could actually extrapolate on the groundwork we did with Art and Arcana. It felt like we needed to do that. It felt like it was unfinished story. When we stopped that book, it was right around the time of Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, and it just felt like someone ripped it out of our hands. Like, we're done. You're done. Just stop. Here's a picture. Stick this picture at the end. You get up to Mordenkainen. That's it. And you're like, wait, what? And even with this, we were like, it's coming out in fall of 2023. What's coming? Give it. Let us talk about, like, we need to know what's coming. And we can only get like scraps for that final chapter because we want to be as contemporaneous as possible with what's out there. And all of this stuff, it's still Sigil and the Deck of Many Things and Shattered Obelisk are all like also talking about what came before. So we love that stuff and finding those connections. And I'm also at work on the Dungeons and Dragons history documentary, and you're going to see a lot of Michael and Jon, who are so wise and comely in this documentary, talking for, their expertise on display. And that it's just another dimension of exploring the history of this game. And again, you can't get away from its past. You have to understand where it came from to talk about now.
It's essential. And Michael, you alluded to something earlier. Because when I first heard there was going to be, Lore Legends was going to be 5e focused, I thought, oh, this is cool. But I know there's a lot of books, but there really isn't much there. And then I opened it up and I was like, oh my gosh. I mean, every year there's so much richness that is added to the complexity of the mythology itself. And Kyle, you mentioned like no one has ever played everything 5e. Like, I'm sure all of you sitting here now, or if you're listening to the show, there are certain monsters you've either always wanted to fight or use as a dungeon master, and it just didn't fit contextually for the story. And when I look through Lore and Legends, I realize, my gosh, like if nothing else ever came out again for 30 years, we wouldn't even notice because there's so much richness there. And speaking of richness, I'm going to change gears a little bit as we wrap things up because I certainly want to respect all of your time. Fascinating part about Dungeons and Dragons is the character creation and finding the voice of your character, which can be pretty daunting in and of itself. And finding their alignment is a huge part of that. Because I've got some pretty big time Star Wars fans here, we're going to talk about certain Star Wars characters and what do you think their alignment might be in the world of Dungeons and Dragons. Now, some seem pretty clear, like Palpatine. I feel like he's pretty cut and dry. But what about someone like let's throw Vader in, and maybe his alignment changes throughout his history. But where do we think Vader is?
Well,
are we going to say Anakin? I mean, do we want to say Anakin Clone Wars? I don't know. It's kind of fun.
I guess the thing that occurs, because when you said Palpatine, the first thing that I was thinking to myself is, obviously, lawful evil. Well, is he lawful? Do Sith tend to be lawful? I mean, they follow the rule of two. They tend to,
right?
Or are they more chaotic usually? I need to give this a little bit of thought. Come on, Kyle, help us out.
I think chaotic
obviously lawful. I mean, what again, like dictatorship societies in which you enforce order, like, are lawful, right? And it's originally D&D only had 3 alignments, right? There was just lawful, neutral, and chaotic. Mm-hmm. They grafted on the fourfold ways. Then you had a lawful good versus lawful evil. And there was originally like a ton of dispute about, well, what really is it to be lawful, right? Mm-hmm. And there's plenty of horrible societies that are extremely lawful that exist in the world today.
And they do accept that, the Sith accept that there's a certain fate, the rule of two. They know that they're going to get usurped. They know there's a point where they're going to get backstabbed, and they almost welcome it because they want a more evolved version of the Sith to continue forward. Smarter, stronger. They commit to that structure. So the Jedi are also equally lawful. So you have to, I think they both fall in that like paladin type category. They have to be this, paragon of good, and I think there's a lawful paragon of evil for the Sith. They apply it in different ways. The Jedi spent 1,000 years anticipating, chaotic, bloodthirsty stuff coming forward, but really they were very patient. They were very thoughtful. They controlled the banks. They controlled the culture, and they ascended through subterfuge and politics and they didn't reappear in a way that the Jedi were anticipating, which is, how they used to be, which was like, cunning warriors on a battlefield and merciless. They applied a totally different approach to power over that 1,000-year gap.
Well, I guess I'd say that if you can't make up your mind whether you're good or evil, you're neutral. So maybe we'd say Vader is lawful neutral.
And I think he probably certainly gets that. Certainly in Return of the Jedi, he has made a change of alignment. Certainly when he throws the Emperor down the pit. But Kyle, you were talking about the Jedi. I might argue that the Jedi's lawfulness was maybe their downfall because they got arrogant, they got staid and stale. Like for example, let's just pretend, for example, that Qui-Gon Jinn is chaotic good, which I think he was. I think he did not. Yeah. He did not appreciate the rigidness.
That's why
Jedi
he wasn't
law.
On the council.
That's why he wasn't on the council. But I think I feel like the Jedi's lawful goodness, if you will, made them blind to the Sith coming up, which I actually kind of feel like they're chaotic evil. I feel like the Sith were unpredictable in that way, and because of their lack of rigidness against their own laws and so forth. I don't know. Dan, you have vexed me. You have vexed me with your question.
They didn't come at it head on, Michael. That what they did was, Palpatine's standing in a room with these people, and they don't sense anything.
Yeah,
he's not sitting there manipulating people with the dark side. He's just being a politician,
which can be scary in its own right.
The scariest of all.
Boy, Mark Twain would love this conversation. How about Mace Windu? Some of his reputation, I think, is stuff that we're just sort of ascribing to because we want Samuel Jackson to be a certain way. But we do see Mace Windu, of course, in the Clone Wars and in various stages, and clearly there's some tension and he's quite skeptical of Anakin as Anakin gets older. Of course, you see what happens in Revenge of the Sith, but where would you put? Because I love the idea of Qui-Gon being chaotic good, but where is Mace Windu in that spectrum?
I would have put him more on the lawful side, I think, with most of the Jedi Council, most of the Jedi Order, I think.
Definitely Obi-Wan lawful good, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
He's lawful because he had an opportunity to allow Anakin has this nexus point in the Force, and Mace being a character who can sense shatter points. Mm-hmm. He did not allow Anakin, maybe out of fear, into that room with himself, Eth Koth, and the other Jedi to confront Palpatine. Yet Anakin, had he been able to see what was going on, he, rather than coming in after the fact, would have maybe it would have played it differently. But I don't think it would have gone the way it went, because Anakin, he's a good at heart person. I think he would have. That's why he left Palpatine and said no. He was manipulated, though, so had he been present, it would have been a very different situation. So I think Mace's lawfulness was an extreme one, and it completely undid him. He also didn't really want to accept Anakin onto the council. But I think Yoda, there's an unpredictability Yoda, because I think he had to go, if you're going to believe in something like a prophecy, the son of sons, you've got to kind of let things happen. I think he understood that things have to happen. Yeah, all right, we're going to train him now. It's the cat's out of the bag. He's here. This is Obi-Wan takes him on, and that's more in the style of Yoda. So I think, yeah, he participates in this lawful thing, but he's also, there's something outside of that system that allows him to be the 900-year-old wisest guy in the world.
Yes. Interesting. You've opened up a lot of questions. We'll get you on this one. Is there anybody in Star Wars who's lawful neutral? No one that comes to my mind. And we've got a lot of characters to choose from, because they can't all be lawful good. That would be boring, and I don't think that is the case.
Lawful, yeah.
Maybe in the Marvel universe, you could find somebody like that.
I feel like Boba Fett goes from like a chaotic evil to a true neutral type of. I mean, like Book of Boba Fett. I'm talking about,
sure,
like that's a different animal, and he has kind of a code.
Oh yeah,
yes. So
I mean, Din Djarin, would he be? He very much has a code.
Oh, yeah, right.
He is
right,
the
right.
code. Yeah.
I mean, watching some of the more recent series is, I mean, a good way to look at lawful neutral again would be people that they can go good, they can go evil, as long as there's order, they don't really care. Like all the people who, were fine with the Empire and are like basically doing the same thing now in the Republic that we saw in Ahsoka, right? Like the NPCs, not like the main character, just like the bureaucrats that just seem to be everywhere. That's probably close to lawful neutral.
Like Kazuda Xiono's father, the senator from Ahsoka, perhaps. Yeah.
Maybe even like some of the guilds that are out there that are like, whichever way it swings, we're still going to get our contracts, and it's just a different person calling the shots, and we're not going to get involved beyond the capacity that it affects us. They're like, when the people they have to draw into the rebellion are coming from, a lot of them from lawful neutral positions, the politicians, as John said, and also, fringe groups that have to get, collected into this new entity. A lot of people are, nonplussed either way because there's more danger in doing it. So I think their hand has to be forced. I think maybe that is in that era of Star Wars. It's those people that have to get like jolted into make a choice.
Listening to Coffee with Kenobi, you are, with Dan Z, the podcast you're looking for. This is...
Excellent. Well, I as much as I hate to admit it, I'm afraid I'll have to make a choice and end our little show here because we've got to go out. We've got to go buy some books. We've got Lore and Legends, a visual celebration of the 5th edition of the world's greatest role-playing game, and then Heroes Feast, Flavors of the Multiverse, which we barely got a chance to get into, but this is the week of Thanksgiving. It seems to me that would make for an excellent early Christmas present. So, gentlemen, you are certainly welcome to come back on the show anytime. I think we could probably spend hours just talking about the alignment of some of these characters, but we're going to go. I see your coffee's getting low, so please let everybody know where they can reach out to you if they want to talk Dungeons and Dragons, Star Wars, anything like that. John, let's start with you.
I mean, if nobody needs to reach out to me, it's okay, really. I'll pass.
Stop. You got to follow. John's got an amazing blog.
No, I don't. I used to blog. Social media is poison.
If you love this stuff, you got to go back and look at it. And John's got some incredible new books coming up. He's doing some very cool stuff. So I would follow John on his Twitter for sure.
Love it.
Hey, John. Hey, Kyle. Do you have anything coming out? Maybe Star Wars related or otherwise?
Yeah.
Love to know.
First,
any days we can celebrate.
We have a couple things. We have the Lore and Legends Special Edition, which is this beautiful box set that's coming November 28th. That is packed with this incredible full map of the Forgotten Realms with these icons that denote where all of these important adventures kicked off, and it's not like anything that's been put out. So if you love cartography and you're a big fan of 5e, this is like a one-of-a-kind thing. There's a special anniversary dice in there. There's a dice tray. It's exclusive Hydro 74 cover. He did our Art and Arcana. It's packed in this beautiful slipcase. As Sam likes to say, you can kill someone with it. It's so heavy and beautiful. That's coming November 28th. It's freaking awesome. Demogorgon on the cover. It's impressive. You have to have that. That's for like the Uber collector. It's gorgeous. We have the Heroes Feast show, which is airing right now on Amazon Freevee, Plex. I find it much easier to navigate and find it on Plex. You can get it on most TVs. It's an app. It's awesome. So there's going to be 20 episodes of Heroes Feast. We are in all 20 episodes as lore masters, and they really do a good job of, showcasing the book that it all sprang from, which is the original Heroes Feast. Mm-hmm. So we're very proud of that. And if you love Star Wars, and I think if you're listening to this show, you probably do, I am a producer of the, it's called The Disturbance in the Force. It's how the Star Wars holiday special happened. It is much more than just a look at the holiday special. It's a real look at a time in Star Wars history. It's very undocumented. It's that time between A New Hope and Empire when it was the Wild West and Star Wars could be anything. It could go in a million different directions. And to get Star Wars out there and cement it in the zeitgeist, George started approving things like Bob Hope, The Muppets, Richard Pryor, Donnie and Marie. And in that avalanche of approvals came the Star Wars Holiday Special. And so it's a look at late 70s television. And it's kind of demystifying some of the myths about the Holiday Special, but also it's like you have to understand the context of the art. And it's like it was plugged into something called a variety show, and you have to understand the variety of the show to understand. But it had all of the original actors in it, Harrison, Carey, Mark, Peter Mayhew, Anthony Daniels are all in it. How the hell did this thing happen? It is a train wreck, but it's the film doesn't have a mean bone in its body. It's really fun. It's got like Seth Green, Kevin Smith, Patton Oswalt, Weird Al, lots of people talking about this holiday special, and that's coming December 5th to VOD, streaming in the spring, and it's in theaters right now, Canada, Australia, UK, and US. So if you go to disturbanceoftheforce.com, there's a whole bunch of screening listings. So I promise you, it is so much fun.
I can't wait.
Yeah, it was a joy to work on it, and every time I watch it, I'm laughing out loud. So I'm very proud of it.
So good. Oh, I love it. Well, thanks for making that. I mean, that's going to be a great companion piece.
Thank you.
Michael.
Why did I let Kyle go before me on a show that is Star Wars? I mean, what was I thinking? Well, last but certainly least, if you want to find me, you can find me on empireofimagination.com. That's my website. That was the title of my first book, which was a biography about Gary Gygax. And actually, the one thing that I'm pretty excited about is I just came out with my first published middle grade fantasy novel. Actually, so thank you, Kyle. And you'll be unsurprised to find out it is heavily D&D inspired. So Vivian Van Tassel and the Secret of Midnight Lake came out just a couple of months ago. It's through Simon & Schuster. And so think like Harry Potter, Percy Jackson, Fablehaven. That's the kind of genre we're talking about. But in this case, it's extremely Dungeons & Dragons focused and inspired. In this particular case, it's beasts and battlements. But it's a great book. Anyone that has kids you're trying to get interested in tabletop role-playing games, it's a really great book for them between, say, the 3rd grade and 7th grade level. And then, of course, if you're someone even of our age, you might appreciate some of the fun, thinly veiled D&D history and stuff that's in there. So that's what I've been excited about. In addition to these books, I've been working out with these people here. So it's been a busy fall.
Well, we are all the better for it. Thank you all so much, Jon Peterson, Kyle Newman, Mike Witwer. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dan.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi unless otherwise indicated.
This is the podcast you're looking for.
There's no one here. Move along. Move along.